Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Congratulations to our professional of the year. It's Grant Venerable joining us again from Art Molecular Concepts. Excited he's here to talk about, well, we're getting back to school time and so much more. But really, as far as, him lecturing, his published articles, him as an author, his expressional art, he does so much. And of course, helps with consulting and a lot more than that. Let me have the man of the hour introduce himself. Welcome, Grant, and congrats again.
Well, good morning. I guess it's still good morning here on the West Coast.
Yeah, it all depends where you are. But good morning, good afternoon. We are good, right?
Yes, we are good.
Thank goodness.
Been doing a lot of thinking about the past, the memories, important memories, and how does everyone get from today to tomorrow? How did they get to today?
Yeah.
And how will they get to tomorrow? That's a part of the conversation that needs to be filled in now, from actually before birth until after the end of this existence, and the responsibilities that each mortal soul has to navigate that passageway. For me, the best example is the whole task before us to learn. Education may be the most important activity of the human experience. You set aside procreation, set aside daily nutriments, daily everything else that we have to do to stay alive. But to really enrich and progress in our lives, we need a solid basis in learning, and that can take many forms. For me, it takes the form of what I experienced in my past is where my parents sent me to the local elementary school in the north center of Los Angeles, near the University of Southern California campus, just a mile from the USC campus, which now is a huge, beautiful campus, much bigger than when I was a child and when it was still beautiful, but not like it is today. Part of that is what your parents have planned for you. And
True.
Plans don't always work out, but they do the best they can. This is to focus today on the plan that gets the offspring into 17 to 18 years of age when they enter college. Those that do are fortunate enough to go to college.
Yep.
I was in my last assignment before retiring between 2000 and 2010 in the oldest historically Black university or college in America.
Amazing.
And it was founded in 1854.
Wow.
And there were some others that were around, but Lincoln University was the first one to actually grant a bachelor's degree. So what the president does, at least then, is welcome the new students and has a nice little speech. And at that time, in 2010, just before I retired and before welcoming the new students, I was at that time the chief academic officer, and it has many titles. One is vice president for academic affairs and provost.
Yep.
And at that time, I was also vice president for student affairs. I was for about a year. But the importance of talking about that is that the chief academic officer didn't have all of the influence on getting students ready for week of welcome.
Got
and
it.
because I had control of that part of the curriculum, I could do what I had always wanted to do along with the academic deans, was to actually have significant speaking roles at that first week of the new students' arrival on the campus of Lincoln University. Usually several hundred students, maybe over 1,000, and we'd meet in the big auditorium. There was a chance, actually, one of the activities was to meet with parents of the new students. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because parents want to know that they can trust the university with their offspring, their beloved children.
Of course.
And the first question that's asked by parents is, how can we protect our students, our children, from losing their faith in God when as soon as they go into the course in introductory biology and are taught the section on Charles Darwin and evolution? And that was my opportunity to really hit a grand slam homer as far as getting these students in the right frame of mind as to what is college. Well, the first thing college is not is to preserve intact everything you believe is important about yourself or in life. And then the second thing is that we then build on the foundation that you bring from high school, from your families. And so that's how I start. There's going to be more than one experience that's going to rock your children's ideas and belief systems. That's one of the most important purposes of a college education. Otherwise, why go to college? If there's nothing to challenge your young people in everything they've learned by then what's the purpose of college? So then the questions begin. Well, the teachers, our professors, are not here to destroy any of your children's beliefs in anything, but it is to open new opportunities, to show them the whole landscape of knowledge. Then it becomes something even more important, and that is the words self-responsibility, which starts right here in college, if not
especially
before college.
It should be before. A lot of times it's not these days, right? I feel like the younger generation, maybe when they come to college, it's like a culture shock. But yeah, I think when we were younger, we learned a little earlier, but it's very important to take that accountability. Yes.
And I mean, my parents used what Ronald Reagan used to say with our dealings with the Soviet Union and nuclear disarmament. And he said the words, trust, but verify. And that was my parents' philosophy in raising children. Trust your children that they've learned all of the important lessons from you, to be careful, to be safe. And I mentioned this maybe last time about my mother when she would show us how to cross the streets. You look both ways before crossing to make sure it's safe. So what would she do for some, a week or two? She would trail us at a safe distance so we didn't know we were being trailed, because she had to verify that we got the lessons thoroughly. And so that was important. Then here in college, it's a bigger trust maybe, but these professors are some of the most educated people in the nation. They're experts in their fields of study. Mine was in chemistry, which is one of the important bases for understanding biology, but it was also in physics. So I talked from that understanding of my own growing up and getting educated, and also being challenged by things I felt I understood as an 18-year-old and discovered I didn't. And so that's what college was there for, was to challenge me and teach me a methodology of understanding how to know something. So professors are pretty good at asking questions. That's what they're getting you ready for as a young student, to ask the right questions, not questions that preserve some predetermined belief that you might have, whether that's religion, whether that's politics, whether that's just going up to the store and buying the right groceries at the store or something else. That also is the key to science, to dealing with science. They're coming into college with a lot of controversial ideas that they get off of the radio, off of the television, off of the news, off of friends, family members that have one view, and then there's another view. And that includes especially politics. Well, some of the family members are Republicans, some are Democrats. And so the students bring all of those impressions with them. And not everyone in the family has the same religion. If they all have a religion, that's where responsibility comes in. And that's why this conversation hangs on the idea of being accountable for your own choices and decisions that you make in your life. And if Darwin helps with that, that's really good. But they do learn some things that dispel misconceptions about what Darwin actually did, and that his theory of evolution is not the prevailing theory that is taught any longer. So what is the prevailing theory? Go to your classes and you're going to find out what that is. Now, I want to get to the terminology, because everything that we're talking about deals with a branch of a field called anthropology. That's what college is about. The study of humankind. Anthropo, and then the logy, L-O-G-Y, is the study of people, human beings, as individuals and in a group. One of the most fascinating subjects that I was privileged to take at UCLA from one of the great men in that field, who discovered many of the scientific bases for race. What we now just gloss over race. Now nobody knows what race means anymore. They hear a lot about it. You can't use race in deciding who gets into college. You can't use race. But the people that make those laws don't even evidence that they understand race as something that's other than what you see when you look at somebody. I think that earlier civilizations, say in the last 200 years, had a better grasp of race than we do now, because it was equivalent to nationality. And Europe, I mean, a lot of our people in America come from European ancestors, and they understood it well. If you just start with the UK, which America is a child of UK more than any other nation of Europe. And the UK had so many nationalities of people who were citizens of those sub-nations. There were the Welsh, there were the Scots, there were the Irish, and there were many others that we don't even hear much about. And so people could generally say, oh, the Irish race. Someone is of the Scots race. In general, people pretty much knew what that meant. And it had a lot to do with language, because the Scots people spoke English with a different accent than the English, and so did the Irish. So that's a great place to start. And then things evolved even more, because really of this group of people, a large group of maybe 4 million people that had been in bondage in this nation until the Emancipation Proclamation that released people from slavery. Then race took a whole new outline to it. It involved skin color. So people expanded especially in the legislatures, to it's what you saw. That's what race is. What is the color of the person? That was so important that the state of Virginia in 1924, just 100 years ago, had the legislature passed a Racial Integrity Act. And it defined for the courts what race is. Now, you don't hear much about that. You don't ever hear about that in the news broadcasts. But I think that's why the Supreme Court of the United States gets so stuck on the issue of race, and that they've allowed so much nonsense to pass as law. It's because they're using the Virginia Racial Integrity Act that says you are white unless you have more than 1/64th African heritage. That goes back 5 or 6 generations.
Wow.
You have just one ancestor that stepped out of Africa. You're black. You're black, sir. You're black, man. And that's caused a lot of confusion. It didn't lead to clarity at all in the United States. But now, with the development of science,
amazing,
hold your hat, with molecular biology, genetics, the discovery of the structure of DNA and RNA, we can now nail down what race is. And it's really a genetic gene pool. In fact, it's got so exacting that you could look completely different from somebody else, but still be from the same or similar gene pool. And so you find this conundrum, such as, that's like a real question. You have Nelson Mandela, the late leader of South Africa,
God bless,
being more similar in his genetic properties to the Swedish races of people. And if you even look at some of the faces of Mandela's people, they're very similar to the shapes of Swedish people. So what do you can race to? You can't. You have to just look at the chromosomes and the genes, because visual identification isn't going to work it. And the poor census taker can't make that determination anymore. What happened in this week of welcome is that the parents were pretty satisfied in this emotional saying goodbye to their kids. And so then there's a ceremony that celebrates that first big separation in life of these youngsters leaving home and leaving them in the care of these educators. And then they leave, they go back in their automobiles, and the students go to their residence halls. And so that's that. So where does that put you right now, Jill? Does any questions come up there?
No, I'm just intrigued with all of your knowledge. My goodness. And every time I speak to you, we clearly with your academic, scientific brain, there's so much that you always bring up and enlighten our listeners with, including me. So I've been learning a lot from you, and to hear about this too, and the welcoming part of the college, and to now, Nelson Mandela, and I'm great. Keep going. I'm still listening and I'm learning.
Well,
what's next?
Let's get into a different part of linguistics of our vocabulary. And that's a word I think most of us have heard is called etiology. etiology, etiology, which is the science of, well, originally it meant what causes certain illnesses. There's an etiology of illness. Sometimes it's organic. It's because of a toxin in the body. It's because of a physical accident, or because of an environmental cause where someone can't handle psychologically what's happening. But that word has expanded to include what's the cause of how we got to all of the problems we're facing today. And that gets to expanding what we call our reference frames to life. And I've been blessed with being around friends who were well educated, very intelligent, and one of them has had a structure he calls the Williams spheres. And I'm going to expand it maybe by one or two spheres, but they have to do with the category of possible human experiences that we have in life, between getting here as an infant and leaving here at the other end, what we call end of life. And the first description of human experience that I like to cover is the intellect, how we utilize our brain's intelligence. It's not always cognitive being you're thinking things through, using induction, using deduction, but there's another kind of intelligence that's equally important. It's called emotional. People can get carried away by the feeling of emotion as well as by the quality of emotion, which is emotional intelligence. Without that emotional intelligence, it's difficult to balance what we learn cognitively through the reasoning mind, because it's the emotions that will often tell us better than figuring something out intellectually what is right or wrong. Because it's the emotion, not just, as I said, the common feeling, but that in-depth heart emotion that includes what we call empathy. Do we have a feeling toward the experiences of another fellow human being that allows us to recognize them as a neighbor? I mean, neighbor in the broad human sense. Someone we don't even know in a small village in China, right as we do this broadcast, is a neighbor because they're part of the human group right here. And what we do here can affect them. The quality of their life, what they do there, can affect us. And there's been so much in the foreign relations domain, just in the last 2 decades especially, that affects that empathic connection between our people in the United States and other peoples elsewhere. There's another domain of human experience that brings it's beyond just the intellect, but it's related to the feeling, it's related to the emotion. That's the sociality, the socialization. Yeah. How do we socialize each other? Mm-hmm. We can socialize through school, through career, through organizations, through religion, socialization, social, which has various categories in it, different levels of being, your ranking in the society in which you live. And so we learn how to manage rank. That's managed differently in different nations in the world.
Yeah.
I've noticed that just in how American industry organizes itself. Now, hold your hat on this one, but this is one of the many hat holders I'm talking about. I noticed one of our great information technology companies, because it applies to so many, I won't call out its name just yet. But because its executive team came from another country, they imported with them to one of these large computer makers here their culture, probably without knowing it at first, but they also want to make money. And many of these companies have discovered they can cut down on customer service budgets, obligations, bills by eliminating use of the telephone.
Yeah.
And everyone knows what I mean on that. I've got to call a few companies like that allows ads. They're supposed to make the ads go off my computer screen, but they've come back. So I go to a search engine and look up their telephone number. They don't have a telephone number. They want you to go to the website and talk to a robot and explain it to them. So that's another thing. You have the social ranking in a company that employs you. You also have the area. There's 3 S's. So that's the social, the socialization aspect. There's the spiritual aspect and the sexual aspect. So spirit, it doesn't necessarily refer to a religion, but it can. And that's part of the choices that people have to decide they're going to make.
Yeah.
And it was only 2 years ago when I even discovered my own choice as to nether hat holder, hold your hat. What is God? Is there a God? If there is, what is it? Who is it? He, she, it. And even though I have gone to church since I was born, I didn't grasp that intellectually, but I grasp it in a more important way, that is through emotional intelligence, to get the value out of it. By that I mean, I go weekly, every Sunday, to the little Methodist church that my parents took us to. My father had been in that church for already something like 20 years. My mother's, one of her uncles was the preacher of the church, who came a little later on, but we were all there. But this church was founded by a group of people who were World War I veterans. These people were close friends. They survived the war and they came back.
Amazing.
And many of them were already Methodists. And they decided to form their own little Methodist church called the AME Church for short. The AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal. Now, this is a history lesson. History and culture. Founded in Philadelphia in about 1789. And that has a whole history to it that's interesting. So, but we were raised as children with other children in this church. We had a Sunday school, we had the regular church service, and we discussed at home over meals, like there was the blessing before the meal. And there were verses to be recited, because we each had a little card that my aunt would swap out the verse and say, now read the verse. And then we'd talk just a few moments. What does the verse mean? And that was really my religious training. There was one more aspect to this Methodist approach, and that was the approach of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Always had historically been called the Mormon Church. Well, they've been kind of not, they don't really use that name, but they use the whole name. But I still use the short reference when I've got to save some time here. But the beauty of that was my dad had listened to the choir and organ broadcast since 1929. And he would turn it on. My mother would turn it on every Sunday morning while we were getting ready to go to church, to the little Methodist church. That is how I knew so many Protestant hymns, was just listening to the choir and the organ. But it also inspired me to develop my piano lessons until the day I could actually play the organ. But the style I use of playing the organ is the same style that these very experienced veteran gentlemen would use, whose names are Alexander Schreiner and Frank Asper. I mean, they inspired me so much as ages 5 up to 15, 20, that I borrowed their style. So even today, yes, I learned the organ, and I sometimes play the organ at the churches that I attend, even here in the desert here. So I'm stepping up with each of these categories of experience. There are beliefs that are handed to us by parents, grandparents, families, friends. Some of the beliefs the parents don't want you to pick up from maybe some of your contemporaries. But you also pick up beliefs from the radio, from the television, from the movie industry, and they become part of your standard belief set, right or wrong. Where that especially has the most powerful impact is in that 5th category, the sexual category. Everything you believe may not be very true. And that is another responsibility one has to develop as one moves through adulthood, is self-education to learn, well, what's true? What's not true? Where is that showing up today? Transgender young people, do they get medical care?
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court just said, yes, we have the right to deny them medical care. So we also, as citizens, have the responsibility of saying, well, what am I responsible for? Am I responsible for my neighbors or not? That's religion. That's ethics. That's morality. But it is part of what is happening today, is what gets us through yesterday to tomorrow, and how we're going to create a society as we keep going. Why am I being so thorough in a way with that? That's my scientific education kicking in.
Mm-hmm.
That taught me, really starting not just in high school, but in college, where I had some of the top professors in the world teaching me chemistry, physics, and mathematics at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. And so that's what taught me how to ask questions, even if I'm just talking to the television. And I say in my own mind, sometimes I even vocalize it, they'll announce something. Oh, the president did this, or the governor decided that, or the mayor decided that. And I'm sitting saying, how do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
You hear all over the place, well, the president's approval ratings are XYZ, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. Or during an election, all you hear are polls. And all I'm doing is asking, well, how do you know if the poll is accurate?
Yeah.
What questions are used in the poll?
Uh-huh.
How do they know if it's accurate?
Very
What
true.
testing did they do to find out who was surveyed? What's their background? So that's what science did for me, was cause me. That's etiology of what causes me to ask the right questions. Until I get the answers, I can validate and verify so much. Well, I think one of the big arguments is listening recently to a YouTube with Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the great astronomers and astrophysicists of this planet. And I love his expression, how he explains his field
Mm-hmm.
to you. And, well, Neil does not hold to a belief in God. He will say that. But he's at the point where he does say people who want to believe in God,
Mm-hmm.
it's fine. He doesn't hold a definition to it, but anyone can do what they wish. I'm breathing for just a moment here so I can take a breath, because some recent ground I covered in the last few years was a part of the scriptures in the New Testament with the Gospel of John. There's the verses, John, first verse. I suddenly had a revelation on what it really is saying if I understand the linguistic origins of the words that are used. And you'll recognize it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And one day after hearing that, I looked it up.
Yeah.
I looked in the dictionary. In fact, I looked online, which is easy to do. What did I look up? I looked up etymology of the origin of word. Etymology of the origin of the logos. Because word, as it's used in the New Testament, comes from the Greek logos. So it's really in the beginning was the logos. And the logos was with God. And the logos was God. I said, I finally have what it is. Logos, when you really get underneath what it means narrative.
Okay.
That comes again to your freedom of choice.
Mm-hmm.
What is my own personal, private narrative I have developed about what other people call God? And maybe I call it God too, but now I understand I have a narrative that's just beyond that verse.
Yeah.
But most people in a religion stay with whatever the minister says from the pulpit.
Yeah.
And that's what deGrasse Tyson is trying to say is not necessarily for you, particularly if you're a scientist.
Yep.
And not many scientists hold to a God that causes people to say, oh, you're an atheist. But people can say, well, that's your word. What is atheist? It means without theos, without God.
True.
But it's your life. And that's the thing to really get from education. You are responsible in the final analysis for your own life. And I realized if theos is that one unifying concept that has priority in your life over all other things, that's a statement of my God.
Yep.
And if my priority is the laws of nature and how they relate to the laws of civilized behavior in our American civilization, that becomes my Godhead.
Yeah.
And I said, my goodness. And I still can go to any church or not go to any church that I please. But I do choose to go. So I go because of the spiritual energy that I'm able to. It helps to guide me through the day, through the week. Yep. And I still have my science to rely on. And I still claim that the laws of science are the ultimate determinants of everything that happens. And when you look hard enough, you find that the most recent laws we've learned about quantum physics actually predisposes to spiritual understanding.
Wow, that's a heavy one. Really? I can't believe if you are just tuning in and you're probably saying, who's speaking, Grant? The Honorable Dr. Grant Venerable. You know him as an author, the many works he's written, of course. He's also an artist, chemist. He spent so many years of his career and still is teaching so many, right? And let me just ask how, I know we talked a lot about science. We talk about, today the welcoming process with schools and just life and spirituality in general. But I also just want to ask about you as an artist, if you don't mind, because we never honed in on that really. And I'm just curious, what type of work do you do?
My art. Oh my goodness.
And unless you don't want to talk about it, but it sounds pretty impressive.
My mother's side of the family has more artistic expression among her sisters, brothers. I was very active in doing art in elementary school. I enjoyed watercolor art. I enjoyed watercolor in junior high school. I did posters in junior high school. But in junior high, I loved to make paintings of trains, railroad locomotives.
Mm-hmm.
I was crazy over diesel engines, diesel locomotives, passenger cars, trains going over tracks through mountains and by the sea. And my teachers were real enthused over them, but I got evolved to industrial scenes.
Wow.
Pictures of trains going by an industrial corporate building. And what happened to that? It happened that the art teacher recommended me to go with students of other junior high schools to the Otis Art Institute on a PTA art scholarship back in when was that? About 54. That's when I graduated from junior high. Who did I have as a teacher? I had a famous studio painter, Joseph Magnani.
Okay.
Joseph Magnani worked closely with the author who wrote Fahrenheit 451, a science fiction writer. So they were closely associated. But even though that was technological, Magnani exposed us. We were 14 and 15-year-olds that summer. And he said, I'm going to let you learn to draw and paint the human nude figure. So he got nude models. There was a regular young woman and a young man that came in, and they modeled for us. They'd come in their bathrobe, and then they would slip out of their bathrobe. Yeah. This is where that fifth Williams sphere comes in, of sexuality, which is really the psychological definition of what attracts you, who attracts you, why it attracts you, why they attract you. It made no judgments beyond that. It's just simply, that's what interests you in that area of life. Well, the Magnani, he says, I figure you guys are very mature young people. And we were. I have to say, we were. Because he was able to teach us using geometric shapes that fit different parts of the human body, to start with pencil drawings of those shapes and then fill them in with the curves around the body we were drawing with these models. Now you asked me about the arts.
Yeah.
That's where it started. But I didn't have anything to do with it once I got home, because I wasn't in junior high anymore. I was in high school and focusing more on math and science and English and social studies and Latin. But I did keep up my art. And I learned the chemistry, I learned the physics and the math. By the time I got to UCLA, I found myself attracted to, again, that word of what attracts you, what interests you. I got attracted to the shapes of atoms and molecules by their electron orbitals around those atoms and molecules. And I had two professors who used colored chalk to draw those atoms on the board, which inspired me even more. I said, I've got an idea. I went home, took out my oil paintings, my oil paints, canvases I hadn't used yet, and I began to draw pictures of atoms and molecules. Very crude ones at first, but the more I did it, the better I got. So that's one thing you can see in my memoir, is that there's at least one of my oil paintings on molecular structures in each chapter, and some chapters have 2 or 3 paintings in them. Well, what happened with that was discovering emotional intelligence. How do I learn chemistry in the first place? How do I learn physics? How do I learn mathematics? I learn how to convert the ideas into a physical painting. My professors saw an exhibit of several of my paintings by the time I was a senior. 2 of them called me into their office and said, okay, my middle name is Delbert. I always went by that, so they'd call me in and say, Del. I didn't use Grant until years later. They said, would you do me a painting of my research work that I'm doing in chemistry? And they'd give me a copy of one of their research papers that had a picture of the painting and the description of its preparation and its properties. And I would take it home, and in 2 weeks I'd come back with a painting, and they'd pay me for it. They'd pay me $50 for it. You can imagine how much that was worth to me in 1964.
Wow.
Then others began to commission me to do artwork of their research. It continued into graduate school.
Wow.
So you really hit the right question, because it was what really got me through graduate school, was being able to use art to envision what a particular theory.
Amazing.
I don't know if you've even heard of the Schrodinger equation, but that was
I have not. I know. What is it called? Say it again. Wow.
The Schrodinger equation. Erwin Schrodinger was one of the major discoverers of quantum physics over in Germany. And I learned how to convert these equations into an abstract artistic form and did several paintings of them. They're in my memoir, believe it or not.
Amazing. Well, we are just about out of time. How did you kind of want to sum up today's show?
Well, how we're moving I think in a direction that is useful for society, that I want to share with society, of what we talked about already. And namely, talking politics without really saying political words, but using linguistics to understand the hidden depth, deep levels of social stuff, political stuff, cultural stuff that's going on in the society. I mean, we had political leaders that have done A, B, and C, that is unloading their views into how they decide we should live. So that's where I'm moving. I'm moving more in that direction. I'm grateful to you, Jill, for allowing me a podium, a platform to start to talk about these things, because my professors didn't always understand what I was trying to say. But I knew what I was saying, and trying to say. And the last thing I want to touch on brings this full circle to the week of welcome.
Beautiful.
When
Yep.
the parents would ask, well, how do we protect our students from losing their faith in God?
Yeah.
I want to start with, I'll be a little bit cultural and ethnic here, but in the Western world, the first people that really began to talk about God
Yeah.
were the Jews.
Yeah.
And that was more important than anybody could ever imagine, because what they got going when they first put in the first scriptures, the Old Testament, the Torah, is
Yes.
that God is nameless. We're not going to put all that crap on God.
Nope.
God is nameless, and God doesn't even have a visual image.
Beautiful.
Except they may have certain visions that, artists have tried to capture those visions. But that led to something the rabbis back in 2000 BCE didn't imagine, namely the development of science as we know it today. Science, mathematics, and technology, because they developed a special technique around the scriptures when they talked about God.
Yeah.
And they would ask themselves, well, how do we know? How do we know this? And that developed a method of asking questions to something that had no physical form that you could see. And that's what we call interrogating the subject.
Amazing.
And
Well, I apologize. We are out of time. I'm sorry. We have to kind of wrap it up. Sorry.
That's where we want to go next.
Yes.
It's what that's about and how I learned science.
Will do. And how do we contact you in the meantime?
You could use the email ventwo@aol.com and look at my website at grantdvenerablephd.com. No dots in PhD, just grantdvenerablephd.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Pleasure having you here and looking forward to the next time we connect. Enjoy the rest of your day, Grant. Thank you.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.